Few words in Greek before I switch to English. Εκ μέρους των διοργανωτών, σας καλωσορίζω στο συνέδριο καταπολεμώντας την πληροφόρηση μέσω της παιδείας για τα μέσα. Η εκδήλωση θα συνεχιστεί στα αγγλικά με ταυτόχρονη μετάφραση στα ελληνικά. Υπάρχουν ακουστικά, τα οποία αν δεν έχετε προμηθευτεί μπορείτε να το κάνετε ακόμα. So good morning. On behalf of the organizers, I welcome you to the conference, the second day of the conference, Combating Misinformation through Media Literacy. The conference is co-organized by the Cyprus University of Technology, the Horizon 2020 program, a project Conform, which is funded by the European Commission, the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of the Ministry of Education of Cyprus, and the Embassy of the United States of America in Cyprus. The event is being live streamed. Please note that you can send your comments and questions using the hashtag #CombatMisinformation on Twitter. And also, please do turn your mobiles silent. We have a number of distinguished guests today with us. We'll start the session with a welcome address by Professor Antigoni, Rector of the Cyprus University of Technology. Mr. Antigoni, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the conference on combating misinformation through media literacy. We're very proud that the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies through Dr. Orlandi are the organizers of this timely and highly interesting event, along with the Cyprus University of Technology. The partners of this event, as previously said, are the Horizon 2020 European Project Point 4, the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of the Ministry of Education and Culture, and the US Embassy in Cyprus. So we're also very privileged to welcome to this event Her Excellency, Jules Darmanin, US Ambassador to Cyprus, Honorable Komodromos Government Representative, Ms. Michaelides, Director of the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of the Ministry of Education and Culture, and Ms. Sophie, Michaelides, Director of the Press and Information Office. I want to express my sincere thanks to the organizers, and especially to our very special distinguished speakers and guests from all over Europe that participate and give added value to this conference. Allow me to say a few things in Greek also. Κυρίες και κύριοι, με ιδιαίτερη χαρά σας καλωσορίζω στο Τεχνολογικό Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου, όπου πραγματοποιείται το Διεθνές Συνέδριο με θέμα καταπολέμησης της παραπληροφόρησης μέσω της παιδείας για τα μέσα. Το θέμα της παραπληροφόρησης είναι η πιο επίκαιρη πρόκληση της εποχής μας και αγγίζει κάθε επίπεδο εκπαίδευσης, κάθε ηλικία, κάθε χώρα. Καθημερινά γινόμαστε μάρτυρες υπερπληροφόρησης, καθώς η τεχνολογία έχει κυριεύσει τη διαδικασία παραγωγής ειδήσεων, σε μια εποχή όπου η λειτουργία των μέσων καθορίζει τη συμμετοχή στο δημόσιο διάλογο, όπου οι πληροφορίες και οι επεξεργασίες τους παίρνουν όλο και πιο διαφοροποιημένη μορφή, ο αναγνώστης θεατής συμμετέχων στον ψηφιακό κόσμο, πολύ μας δηλαδή, χρειάζεται βασικές ικανότητες κατανόησης της πληροφορίας και μια συνειδητοποιημένη προσέγγιση ώστε να φιλτράρει, να ταξινομεί, να αξιολογεί και να διαχειρίζεται σωστά τον όγκο της πληροφόρησης. Το ζητούμενο είναι να υπάρχουν οι απαραίτητες πολιτικές για γραμματισμό στα μέσα και να κοινοποιηθούμε για να καλλιεργήσουμε σε όλες τις βαθμίδες της εκπαίδευσης κριτικά σκεπτόμενους πολίτες. Κοινωνία, πολιτεία και φορείς της εκπαίδευσης πρέπει συλλογικά να εργαστούμε για τον σκοπό αυτό στα πλαίσια της εκπαιδευτικής μεταρρύθμισης. Παρά το πλεονέκτημα της άμεσης πληροφορίας και της πολυφωνίας των μέσων και των εργαλείων επικοινωνίας και πληροφορίας, δυστυχώς τείνει να εκλείψει η πρωτογενής δημοσιογραφική έρευνα. Ο πόλεμος των κλικ πλήττει πολλές φορές αρχές της δημοσιογραφικής δεοντολογίας, ενώ εκλείπει η χρήση αξιόλογης των πηγών. Το Τεχνολογικό Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου, αφουγκραζόμενο τα αγελεύσματα της εποχής, στέκεται πρωτοστάτη στην επιμόρφωση και στην έρευνα σε θέματα γραμματισμού στα μέσα επικοινωνίας. Ο εγγραμματισμός στα μέσα καλύπτει τη διαδικασία διάχυσης της γνώσης για την επικοινωνία και τα μέσα, τόσο στην δευτεροβάθμια εκπαίδευση, όσο και στην κοινωνία των πολιτών. Ως πρώτο βήμα, στόχος είναι να αναλυθούν καλές πρακτικές στη διδασκαλία της επικοινωνίας και των μέσων και να καταστούν χρηστικές στην ακαδημαϊκή κοινότητα και την ευρύτερη κοινωνία. Δεύτερο, είναι σημαντικό να παραχθεί τεχνογνωσία, η οποία θα συνεισφέρει στη διαδικασία διάχυσης της γνώσης για τα μέσα στην πρωτοβάθμια και δευτεροβάθμια εκπαίδευση. Και τρίτο, η προσπάθεια αυτή στοχεύει στην παροχή των αναγκαίων εργαλείων νοηματικής αποδόμησης του προκατασκευασμένου μηνύματος των μαζικών μέσων επικοινωνίας και αφετέρου τα εργαλεία παραγωγής περιεχομένου για να συμμετέχουν οι πολίτες αποτελεσματικά στην διαδικτυακή κοινωνία. Κλείνοντας, θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τους συνεργάτες μας για την στήριξη στην προσπάθεια να διαφωτίσουμε ομάδες πληθυσμού για την αντιμετώπιση της παραπληροφόρησης και να συγχαρώ ιδιαίτερα την καθηγήτρια Ελένη Πίζα και την ομάδα της για την εξαίρετη οργάνωση. Σας ευχαριστώ, εύχομαι δημιουργικές συζητήσεις και καλές εργασίες στα πλαίσια του συνέδριου. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you, Professor Michaelides. And we now have the honor to welcome the Ambassador of the United States of America in Cyprus, Mrs. Jules Darmanin, who will also address the conference.
Kalimera Sas. And unlike the previous two speakers, that's all the Greek that I'll be speaking this morning. Spokesman Komodromos, Rector Aniotos, it's a pleasure to be here this morning in Misol to speak at this countering Misinformation conference. This has been a collaborative effort, and I'd like to thank Dr. Eleni Kiza of the Cyprus University of Technology and Dr. Anastasia Ekonomou of the Pedagogical Institute and their teams for all the excellent and indispensable work in organizing this program. I'd also like to thank the Press and Information Office for their support and the members of Co-Inform for their participation and co-sponsorship of this event. Finally, let me welcome our audiences in Greece, Turkey, Estonia, Latvia, Georgia, and Moldova, who are viewing us live through the technical wizardry of our partners here at Cutting Edge. I would like to say a special hello to the group in Latvia, where I served as ambassador from 2009 to 2012, and absolutely wonderful memories of my time there. Speiks, Labrīt. This event is a collaborative effort among the Republic of Cyprus, the European Union, and the United States. That is as it should be, since disinformation is a common threat to our societies and way of life. In democracies, the power to make decisions rests with the people, who vote their leaders in and out of power, and who vote on crucial referenda that can decide national policies. In order for voters to make the best choices, they must have access to the facts and must be able to debate different policy options in an open, free space. That is why a free and independent media is so crucial to democracy. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote, how can you have an opinion if you are not informed? If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. Disinformation, the intentional spreading of false or misleading information, is not a new phenomenon. State and non-state actors have long used it as part of hostile influence operations to manipulate public discourse and inflame societal divisions. What is new is that hostile actors increasingly exploit advances in technology, such as the internet and social media, to create ever more sophisticated disinformation. They spread it farther and faster, at less cost, while at the same time more effectively hiding the true sources and intent of their activities. The problem here, let me be clear, is not the technologies, but those who misuse them to subvert democratic processes and institutions. Although it can take many forms, disinformation's consistent aim is to poison dialogue, increase polarization, and distract the public. It undermines good governance, free markets, and independent media, human rights, and democracy. While the methods of these hostile actors continually evolve, their motivations generally remain the same. to weaken democracies, and ultimately to undermine the appeal of democracy itself. We cannot let them succeed. This is a collective responsibility. Fortunately, there's now some agreement on the best ways for societies to respond. We must learn to identify disinformation quickly, to counter it aggressively, and to protect our institutions so we can preserve an open dialogue among our citizens. Journalists, educators, and policymakers all have important roles to play in this effort. Journalists. Journalists are the first responders to fake news. They need to resist the urge to publish stories they have not been able to verify. I know this is difficult. This is a really competitive, cutthroat business. But nobody wants to be the first one to put out a false story. Journalists need to be familiar with new tools to help them verify photos. They need to know what online sites are untrustworthy because they have a history of pumping out so-called fake news, and need to work together to establish reliable fact-checking procedures. Practical training, such as that provided today in the workshops for journalists, can help reduce the spread of fake news. If our free and independent societies are vulnerable to disinformation, they also possess a very effective means of which to defend themselves: the free and transparent independent press. Educators are also key contributors to our efforts to maintain our democracies. By teaching critical thinking skills to their students, they can help make them smarter consumers of news and information, ones who can spot the dubious stories and prevent them from spreading through social media. I am happy to see that so many students participated in yesterday's workshops, and that there are teachers here today to learn how to make their students better digital citizens, the kind who will use technology to strengthen human rights and improve, not degrade, our institutions. And I especially commend the Ministry of Education for its proactive initiatives in media literacy. Finally, policymakers, the guardians protecting our democratic freedoms. By steadfastly upholding democratic norms, they provide a framework for the smooth functioning of our societies. Policymakers are the enablers of independent professional journalism. They can provide the resources, tools, and guidance to help not only journalists, but teachers, students, and the general public better identify disinformation wherever it is, hiding in plain sight or in the shadows, in print or online. Disinformation is an international problem that requires international cooperation. This conference is just one example of such cooperation. I hope that in participating today, you learn more about how to identify disinformation, you find new ways to respond, and then you come up with new ideas for collaboration among educators, journalists, and policymakers here in Cyprus, in Europe, and across the Atlantic. We will be announcing funding opportunities after the conference for innovative proposals to encourage just such collaboration. So be on the lookout. Thank you, and enjoy today's proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Bravo, for a very meaningful speech. And I now give the floor to Dr. Athina Michaelides. She's the director of the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of the Ministry of Education and Culture. The floor is yours.
Distinguished guests, I welcome you to a special event today, which deals with an important theme, which continuously receives our growing attention. Please allow me to turn my welcome into Greek now. Αξιότιμη κυρία κυβερνητική εκπρόσωπε, κυρία Πρέσβυρα των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών στην Κύπρο, κύριε Πρίτανη του Τεχνολογικού Πανεπιστημίου Κύπρου, και ορτή προσκεκλημένοι, με ιδιαίτερη ικανοποίηση χαιρετίζω την έναρξη των εργασιών του συνεδρίου με θέμα καταπολεμώντας την παραπληροφόρηση μέσω της παιδείας για τα μέσα, η οποία συνδιοργανώνεται από το Τεχνολογικό Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου, το Ευρωπαϊκό Έργο το Παιδαγωγικό Ινστιτούτο Κύπρου και την Πρεσβεία των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών Αμερικής στην Κύπρο. Τα μέσα ενημέρωσης διαδραματίζουν ουσιαστικό και κρίσιμο ρόλο στο να μεταφέρουν αξιόπιστες και ακριβείς ειδήσεις συμμετέχοντας έτσι δυναμικά και αποτελεσματικά σε μια δημοκρατική κοινωνία. Στις μέρες μας, η μετάβαση σε ένα ολοένα και περισσότερο ψηφιακό περιβάλλον δίνει στους πολίτες νέους τρόπους έκφρασης, καθώς και πρόσβαση σε μεγαλύτερο όγκο πληροφοριών και απόψεων. Ωστόσο, οι νέες τεχνολογίες επιτρέπουν παράλληλα τη διάθεση της παραπληροφόρησης, υπονομεύοντας την εμπιστοσύνη στην κοινωνία της πληροφορίας, σε βαθμό που αποτελεί κίνδυνο για τη δημοκρατία. Η παραπληροφόρηση είναι πρόβλημα που συγκεντρώνει πια μεγάλη προσοχή σε παγκόσμιο επίπεδο και πολλοί υποστηρίζουν ότι η αντιμετώπιση του εδράζεται στο εκπαιδευτικό σύστημα του κάθε κράτους. Σαφέστατα, το εκπαιδευτικό σύστημα μπορεί και πρέπει να κάνει στροφή από τις αναχρονιστικές και ξηρές γνώσεις που πολλές φορές προσφέρει στα παιδιά, στην καλλιέργεια δεξιοτήτων κριτικής σκέψης και στην ενδυνάμωση των αυριανών πολιτών με τα εφόδια εκείνα που θα τους καταστήσουν ενεργούς πολίτες του αύριο. Στόχος μας είναι η συνεχής ενδυνάμωση των μαθητών από μικρή ηλικία, πολύπλευρα και ποικιλότροπα, να καλλιεργήσουν στάσεις, ικανότητες και δεξιότητες, ώστε να μπορούν να αντιλαμβάνονται και να αντιμετωπίζουν αποτελεσματικά τις συνεχείς απειλές που προκύπτουν από την παραπληροφόρηση και όχι μόνο. Υπό το πρίσμα αυτό, η καλλιέργεια της κριτικής σκέψης των παιδιών και των νέων μας και το υψηλό επίπεδο παιδείας στα μέσα αποτελούν απαραίτητα στοιχεία ώστε να είναι σε θέση να λαμβάνουν τεκμηριωμένες αποφάσεις στην ψηφιακή εποχή. Η συνεχής αυτή προσπάθεια του Υπουργείου Παιδείας και Πολιτισμού, μέσω και του Παιδαγωγικού Ινστιτούτου, αφορά κυρίως σε δύο άξονες. Πρώτον, στον άξονα της καλλιέργειας δεξιοτήτων και στάσεων για την ανάλυση της πληροφορίας εκ μέρους των αποδεκτών, ώστε να αποκτήσουν τις κριτικές δεξιότητες και να είναι σε θέση να προστατευτούν από πιθανές παγίδες, αντιλαμβανόμενοι την εγκυρότητα μιας είδησης. Και δεύτερον, στον άξονα της παραγωγής και διάδοσης περιεχομένου από τα ίδια τα παιδιά. Ραδιοφωνικής εκπομπής, μιας ταινίας, τα παιδιά εμπλουτίζονται με εμπειρίες που τους δίνουν την ευκαιρία τα ίδια να ενημερώσουν και να ψυχαγωγήσουν το κοινό. Εργασίες που καλλιεργούν τον σεβασμό και την ευθύνη, τόσο στον ίδιο τον εαυτό, όσο και απέναντι στους άλλους, αναπτύσσουν πολλαπλές δεξιότητες και οξύνουν την κρίση. Το Υπουργείο Παιδείας και Πολιτισμού προωθεί δράσεις, προγράμματα, σεμινάρια και εργαστήρια, ειδικότερα τα τελευταία χρόνια, που στηρίζουν την κοινή αυτή προσπάθεια, όπως είναι η παραγωγή εκπαιδευτικών ταινιών, ηχητικών προγραμμάτων και άλλων. Επιπρόσθετα, το Ινστιτούτο διοργανώνει εδώ και 3 χρόνια, σε συνεργασία με το Υπουργείο Παιδείας, Έρευνας και Θρησκευμάτων της Ελλάδας, τον Πανελλήνιο Ραδιοφωνικό
Καλημέρα σας. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States, dear Rector of the Cyprus University of Technology, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning to everyone. Allow me first to congratulate the university, and particularly, I understand, Dr. Michaelides, the Horizon 2020 European Project Komodromos, the Cyprus Pedagogical Institute of our Ministry of Education, and of course the United States Embassy in Cyprus for the purposeful initiative to organize this conference on this novel and complicated problem that is widespread misinformation, but also relevant workshops on media literacy as a way to minimize the problems and give some answers. I believe it is not simple, because it requires systematic, preventive, and sometimes indirectly constructive action, but it is possible and necessary. Daniel Boostin's idea of American history was back in 1974 summarized in the comment that perhaps the most important single change in human consciousness in the last century, and especially in the American consciousness, has been the multiplying of the means and forms of what we call communication. Alain Manc, a French writer and expert, was writing in 1993 about the media shock, le media shock, suggesting that the media exacerbate each one of our defects. He was talking about the control of the media in the post-industrial world, but at the same time about the preliminaries of what was announced in the early 90s as the new media and their interaction with the standard system of mass media. Today, we live in the middle of a quite rich as well as complicated communication system, combining dominant or central media, other alternative but sometimes equally strong peripheral media, and a dense tissue of a diffusing online social media. The latest give, we all know it, almost unlimited capacities and opportunities of communication and active intervention of a large majority of people. In a context of affluence of information, but also sometimes a mismatch of information. And the affluence of information can result in inflation, but also in misinformation. While in most countries there is concern and worry about misinformation and made-up news, about the unwanted byproducts of what was called the digital revolution in communication, it is in the United States that the topic is really on the top of the agenda. According to The Guardian, reporting yesterday a Pew Research Center study, almost 70% of Americans feel fake news has greatly affected their confidence in government institutions. The vast majority says they sometimes or often encounter made-up news. In response, many have altered their news consumption habits, including by fact-checking the news they get and changing the sources they tell for news. In addition, about 8 in 10 US adults believe steps should be taken to restrict made-up news, as opposed to 20% who see it as protected communication. It is interesting that United States citizens do not blame journalists the most for creating made-up news and information, but put most responsibility on them to fix it. Another interesting finding is that more than making people believe false things, the rise of fake news is making it harder for people to see the truth. As a result, nearly 7 in 10 adults say made-up news and information greatly affect confidence in government institutions, and roughly half say it is having a major impact on our confidence in each other. We have to notice also that made-up news has come to mean different things to different people. In this respect, I think that fake or made-up news are not the only problem. There is a more general issue of the information disorder. I do not imply that there should or could be something like a natural order. It is a fact, however, that the impressive horizontal development of social media networks creates or encourages a grassroots culture of alternative facts, submerged or surrounded by a plethora of unequal and often unidentified sources of information in the context of the massive shift to online social media. The individual is either cherry-picking or oriented by pre-selected convictions or even simply confused. The decentralized communication system that has all the merits of less central control and democratic direct conversation may result at the same time in an individual challenge of misinformation. Allow me now to add also a few words in Greek. Ο δραστήριος πολίτης είναι ένα βασικό στοιχείο και επίσης μια προϋπόθεση της σύγχρονης δημοκρατίας. Ενεργοί πολίτες χρειάζεται να είναι καλά πληροφορημένοι πολίτες. Μέχρι πρόσφατα, καλά πληροφορημένος ήταν κάποιος σε συνάρτηση με την εκπαίδευσή του, με την εκπαίδευση στην ευρεία έννοια του όρου. Σήμερα θα πρέπει να προσθέσουμε την ειδίκευση ή τις ειδικές ικανότητες στον χώρο των media. Χρειάζεται το ευρύτερο κοινό να είναι εκπαιδευμένο σε επίπεδο επικοινωνίας. Επιτρέψτε μου να υπογραμμίσω ότι στον κέριο τίτλο αυτής της διάσκεψης η λέξη κλειδί ίσως να μην είναι το combat, να καταπολεμήσουμε, αλλά περισσότερο είναι λέξη κλειδί η παιδεία, το literacy. Γιατί η μετάδοση, η αναμετάδοση ψεύτικων ή επίπλαστων ειδήσεων μπορεί βεβαίως να είναι μια απειλή για τη δημοκρατία ή και μια πηγή διαφθοράς της κοινωνικής ακεραιότητας, αλλά είναι προφανές ότι αντιμετωπίζεται σαν μια αρνητική μορφή πληροφόρησης. Δεν είμαι βέβαιος, αλλά πιστεύω ότι η παραπληροφόρηση, αυτό που η αγγλική αντίστοιχη έκφραση είναι Misinformation, η παραπληροφόρηση μπορεί να είναι κάτι πολύ πιο περίπλοκο από τις ψεύτικες ειδήσεις. Γιατί σε αυτό το πλαίσιο της αταξίας στην πληροφόρηση, της ποικιλότητας που υπάρχει τριγύρω μας, δεν είναι μόνο πρόβλημα το να ταυτοποιήσουμε ή να αξιολογήσουμε τις πληροφορίες που μεταδίδονται, αποκλείοντας ότι είναι ψεύτικο ή λανθασμένο. Υπάρχει επίσης ένα ζήτημα με μια μεγάλη ποικιλία από μορφές μισής αλήθειας. Πλήνθη και κέραμη ατάκτως ερημένη κάποτε είναι το πλαίσιο πληροφοριών απέναντι στο οποίο βρίσκεται εκτεθειμένος ο σημερινός πολίτης. Και η λέξη εκτεθειμένος σημαίνει ένα παθητικό ρόλο. Ταυτόχρονα δεν πρέπει να υποτιμήσουμε ότι έχει την ευκαιρία να γίνεται συμμέτοχος και δημιουργός. Αυτό κάνει τη συζήτησή μας αρκετά πιο περίπλοκη και την πρόκληση πιο μεγάλη. Η έκταση των ψευδών ειδήσεων σίγουρα είναι ένα θέμα διαφιλονικούμενο. Η αποδιοργάνωση του χώρου της πληροφόρησης, η αταξία στον χώρο της πληροφόρησης, αν θέλετε, είναι βέβαια ένα πραγματικό ζήτημα και θα πρέπει να εστιαστούμε στην συζήτηση για την μετατροπή, για την μετατόπιση της προσοχής μακριά από τις καθιερωμένες πηγές πληροφόρησης και τα ρυθμιζόμενα με νομοθεσίες συνήθως ή με κώδικες κοινώς αποδεκτούς μέσα ενημέρωσης. Η μετατόπιση της προσοχής από τα παραδοσιακά μέσα ενημέρωσης, τα οποία λιγότερο ή περισσότερο υπόκεινται σε υποχρεώσεις, κανόνες και βεβαίως σε μια γενικότερη ηθική της επικοινωνίας, θα πρέπει να συνδυαστεί πάντοτε ως προβληματισμός και δεν πρέπει να χάσουμε από το νου μας το ζητούμενο της ελευθερίας της έκφρασης. Αντιμετωπίζοντας αυτή την κατάσταση πραγμάτων, σίγουρα βρισκόμαστε μπροστά σε ένα περίπλοκο και δύσκολο πρόβλημα. Πρέπει πάντα να έχουμε στο μυαλό μας ότι ταυτόχρονα ζητούμενο είναι να διατηρήσουμε και τις δυνατότητες, αλλά και την πραγματική λειτουργία της ελευθερίας της έκφρασης, της αυτονομίας των μέσων ενημέρωσης, αυτονομίας και βιωσιμότητας. Όπως επίσης και του αιτήματος που συχνά προβάλλει για καινούργια πλαίσια πολιτικής ρύθμισης ή ενδεχομένως για την ανάγκη να ρυθμιστούν νέοι πρωταγωνιστές και νέοι ενδιάμεσοι στο σύστημα της επικοινωνίας. Οποιαδήποτε συζήτηση όμως γύρω από τη ρύθμιση πρέπει να είναι πάρα πολύ προσεκτική και ευαίσθητη στις αξίες της ελεύθερης έκφρασης και της δημοκρατίας. Και βέβαια πρέπει να είναι διεθνής. Any discussion or regulation has to be cautious. And of course, Mrs. Garber, as you underlined it, international. It is the right time to try to face this new reality, raise awareness, and eventually initiate actions on media literacy. And I am quite happy that we have here the presence of our pedagogical institute, and of course the Public Information Office, talking about literacy. Of course, they are not the only agents, but they are the public agents. In this direction, we look forward to the fruitful reflections and conclusions of this conference. I wish you every success to the works of the conference. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε κύριε εκπρόσωπε, μοιραστήκατε τις απόψεις σας σε κέρδες πτυχές του ζητήματος, του προβλήματος. Thank you, Mr. Spokesman of the government. And now, before proceeding with the panel discussion, we will show two video messages from the European Commissioner of Digital Economy and Society, Maria Gabriel, and the Director General of Education and Culture of the European Commission, Cyprus, Themistokleous.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and many greetings. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and many greetings to beautiful Cyprus, to Limassol. The topics of your high-level conference, the fight against disinformation and the importance of media literacy,
are very close to my heart and have been on the top of my agenda throughout my mandate. Today, we live in a world with constant access to an infinite amount of content at our fingertips, in our pockets. Undoubtedly, that is a huge opportunity, something we could have only dreamt about a decade ago. At the same time, it has opened up channels that purposefully mislead people, that try to polarize our views and create distrust in different communities. As somebody already said decades ago, no matter how big the lie, repeat it often enough and the masses will regard it as truth. This statement holds true in our social media landscape. Malicious disinformation poses serious threats to our democratic process. It diminishes trust in media outlets, democratic institutions, and undermines societal public debates, not only during election periods. In order to counter disinformation in Europe, we, as a European Commission, last December, adopted an action plan against disinformation, which showed concrete results during the European elections 2 weeks ago. In particular, Facebook, Google, and Twitter subscribed to our code of practice. They increased the transparency of political ads, created public repositories that inform citizens on who paid for the ad, how much was spent, and what were the targeting criteria used to reach them. Progress has also been made to reduce economic incentives for purveyors of disinformation and to limit the use of automated bots to amplify disinformation campaigns. However, we should not stop here. Another aspect of our strategy to tackle disinformation is the creation of a European multidisciplinary community, including fact-checkers and academic researchers, which should guarantee the necessary capacity to detect, analyze, and expose the phenomenon of disinformation. To this end, the Commission supports the creation of such a community through a platform that connects together and supports the work of independent national teams. Tackling the problem of disinformation means also strengthening media freedom, pluralism, and especially media literacy. I'm firmly convinced that a high level of media literacy is of critical importance. Media literacy enables citizens to navigate our complex news environment in a creative way. It empowers us to judge the veracity of news content, thus helping us make informed decisions. This is why the new Audiovisual Media Services Directive includes, for the first time, a legal obligation for Member States to promote and take measures for the development of media literacy skills. It also obliges video sharing platforms to provide for effective media literacy measures and tools and raise users' awareness of those measures and tools. To make the most out of it, a timely and effective transposition and implementation is necessary, in close cooperation with all media literacy stakeholders, video sharing platforms, and audiovisual media regulators. The Commission is assisting Member States in this task. Moreover, the big success of the first European Media Literacy Week in March, to which also Cyprus actively participated, showed that all stakeholders, including public authorities, media organizations, and educators, have an important role to play. By empowering citizens, we'll make our online ecosystem not only safer, but also less polarizing and therefore more inclusive. Let me finish by congratulating you on the organization of such an important nationwide event. Now that the European elections are over, we cannot stop our important work on disinformation and media literacy. On the contrary, there is much work left for all of us, with a view of preserving the fundamental values of our Union. I wish you a wonderful evening and very fruitful debates in the conference tomorrow. Thank you.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, είναι μεγάλη μου χαρά να συμμετέχω, έστω και με αυτό το μήνυμα, στο Ευρωπαϊκό Συνέδριο για την Καταπολέμηση της Παραπληροφόρησης μέσω της παιδείας για τα μέσα, το οποίο διεξάγεται στη χώρα καταγωγής μου. Το θέμα του συνεδρίου είναι ζωτικής σημασίας όχι μόνο για την εκπαίδευση, αλλά και για την κοινωνία και τη δημοκρατία στην Ευρώπη. Οι γονείς, οι εκπαιδευτικοί, τα σχολεία και οι κυβερνήσεις αντιμετωπίζουν την ίδια πρόκληση. Με ποιους τρόπους μπορούμε να βοηθήσουμε τους νέους να γίνουν όχι μόνο αυτόνομοι, κριτικά σκεπτόμενοι και υπεύθυνοι χρήστες, αλλά και δημιουργοί περιεχομένου, προϊόντων, μέσω επικοινωνίας και ψηφιακών τεχνολογιών. Ο γραμματισμός στα μέσα έχει αναπτυχθεί και εξελίσσεται εδώ και δεκαετίες, αλλά σήμερα αντιμετωπίζει νέες και σύνθετες προκλήσεις. Μεγαλώνοντας σε μια κοινωνία που κατακλείζεται από μέσα ενημέρωσης και επικοινωνίας, οι νέοι πρέπει να αξιολογήσουν κριτικά το περιεχόμενο που βρίσκουν στο διαδίκτυο. Να κατανοήσουν την έννοια της ψηφιακής ταυτότητας, της ψηφιακής ευημερίας και της υπεύθυνης και ασφαλούς διαδικτυακής συμπεριφοράς. Η παιδεία στα μέσα επικοινωνίας πρέπει να εξελίσσεται σύμφωνα με τους ρυθμούς της τεχνολογικής πρόοδου, ιδίως της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης και των νέων πιο περίπλοκων μορφών ψευδών ή παραπλανητικών πληροφοριών. Χρειάζεται να διδάξουμε και να προωθήσουμε ένα ισορροπημένο συνδυασμό δεξιοτήτων για τη χρήση των μέσων και των ψηφιακών τεχνολογιών. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή υποστηρίζει ενεργά τόσο την παιδεία στα μέσα, όσο και την ψηφιακή αγωγή του πολίτη. Συνεργαζόμαστε με τα κράτη-μέλη και τις χώρες εταίρους, προκειμένου να διευκολύνουμε και να προωθήσουμε την ανταλλαγή καλών πρακτικών μέσω ειδικών ομάδων εργασίας. Μέσω του προγράμματος Erasmus+, χρηματοδοτούμε έργα, εκπαιδευτικές ανταλλαγές και προγράμματα κατάρτισης σχετικά με τον γραμματισμό στα μέσα και τις ψηφιακές τεχνολογίες. Επιπλέον, το δίκτυο εκπαιδευτικών και σχολείων του e-twinning συμπεριλαμβάνει την ψηφιακή αγωγή του πολίτη στις βασικές θεματικές δράσεις του. Μέσα από το σχέδιο δράσης για την ψηφιακή εκπαίδευση, παρέχουμε κατάρτιση στους εκπαιδευτικούς όσον αφορά τον κυβερνοχώρο και την ενημέρωση στα μέσα και υποστηρίζουμε την ανάπτυξη των ψηφιακών δεξιοτήτων των μαθητών. Το Selfie, ένα δωρεάν διαδικτυακό εργαλείο αυτοαξιολόγησης για τα σχολεία, εξετάζει την ψηφιακή δημιουργικότητα, την κριτική στάση ως προς τη χρήση της τεχνολογίας και την ασφαλή και υπεύθυνη συμπεριφορά στο διαδίκτυο. Μέσα σε 6 μήνες από την έναρξη λειτουργίας του, το αξιοποίησαν περισσότεροι από 330.000 μαθητές, εκπαιδευτικοί και επικεφαλής σχολείων, με την Κύπρο να πρωτοστατεί. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή θα συνεχίσει να στηρίζει τους νέους, προκειμένου να γίνουν αυτόνομοι και ικανοί χρήστες της τεχνολογίας και κριτικά σκεπτόμενοι πολίτες της ψηφιακής εποχής. Κυρίες και κύριοι, σας εύχομαι καλή επιτυχία και προσμένω τα αποτελέσματα του συνεδρίου σας. Ευχαριστώ.
We now move to the panel discussion titled Combating Misinformation through Media Literacy, the Role of Society and the States. I would like to invite the moderator and the panelists to take their seats. Mrs. Sophie, Mrs. Lara Orlandi, Mr. Jules Komodromos, Dr. Antigoni Themistokleous, Dr. Vasilis Koulolias, Mr. Jules Darmanin, introduce you to our moderator, who will then introduce the panelists and speakers. Sophie Michaelides studied rhetoric and communication at the State University of New York and mass media and political communication in Stockholm in Paris. She worked in large commercial organizations, a leading publishing house, and a major communication technology giant. She has provided professional services to advertising, television, and audiovisual production companies. She has served as political communication director and electoral campaign manager. Her latest appointment as the government's press and information office director provides her the challenge of participating in the nation's strategic communication policy creation, media law and regulation information and monitoring, the strategy of information flow and the promotion of the government's image, activities and achievements through media, diplomacy and institutions. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States of America, Honorable Spokesperson of the Government of the Republic of Cyprus, Honorable Rector of the BAC, I love the name and I love your logo, congratulations. Dear friends, dear panelists, dear guests from abroad, welcome to Cyprus. Welcome to our island, which even though still occupied and divided, gives about 530 million results on Google. 530 results showing the island's rich mythological and cultural heritage and history. A history of more than 10,000 years, which manifests the civilization, the hardship, the struggle, rebirth, change, adaptation, entrepreneurship, and creativity of the island and its people. For this country and its people, my team at the Press and Information Office work in order to provide informed and media-savvy communication services to the state and creative and innovative information services to its people by means of interpersonal, non-verbal, audiovisual, written, and oral communication. The PIO operates by juggling different types of media, competitive communication strategies, marketing models, corporate responsibility, intellectual property law, and more. We organize and supervise teams of media professionals, various mass communication channels and technologies, media and entertainment productions. We make use of organization skills, marketing strategies, media economic understanding, and the knowledge of different software tools utilized by media in media productions. And I guess that's the reason why I am here. I want to start by clarifying the difference between misinformation and disinformation, which both contribute, of course, to fake news. Dictionary defines misinformation as false information that is spread regardless of whether there is an intent to mislead. And it describes disinformation as deliberately misleading or biased information, manipulated narrative or facts. In other words, clear cutthroat propaganda. The difference, ladies and gentlemen, is in the intent. Disinformation carries deliberate intent to spread information which is incorrect, whereas the sender of misinformation may not know the information is accurate. And with the media potential for reaching the broadest audience and shaping the political agenda, this is not really good. Especially today that the internet has acquired a crucial role in the media landscape and the sheer scale of online sources has turned all of us into content curators while presenting us with the new challenges regarding the findability but also credibility and quality of information. The younger generations report social media as their main source of news, followed closely by online news sites. Young people use these channels more than TV news and printed newspapers put together around the world. This obviously has numerous implications. Diversity is becoming less and less human editorial choice and more contingent on the design of algorithms and on the way that content is shared and amplified amongst users. This may, but actually does, affect a variety of media sources that both professionals in the media sector and citizens are exposed to, and calls for new approaches on how to bring public interest content to the public. That said, it is just as important today as ever to strive for the independence of the media and regulatory authorities, to support strong public service media with the ability to cater for all societal groups, to regulate media ownership and control the unprecedented consolidation that has swept the sector, indeed to put in place ownership and finance transparency rules, to prevent undue influence by political and economic interests. There is an important role for each state to ensure that access to innovative technologies, training, data, digital skills and education in the use of the new data-driven means of producing and distributing news is also open to smaller players. And I'm here to listen to what Mrs. Antigoni Themistokleous, officer from the Cyprus Radio Television Authority, is about to say to us in a few minutes. Educational content should enable people of all ages to access and manage media, especially those online. This is important also in the light of the growing competition of new media players such as internet intermediaries. Personally, I feel that more concerted efforts are necessary in this area and look forward to the conclusion of today's conference to provide directions as to which approaches may work and how we can learn to better navigate the digital media environment. One thing is clear, the architecture of digital information environment relies more and more on sophisticated technologies, including artificial intelligence. AI systems can certainly help industries grow, but they can also be deeply disruptive. We need to ensure that AI systems are developed in human-centric manner and within a framework of rule of law, if they are to produce benefits to the society. In connection to this, the role of media regulatory authorities needs to also be empowered for the digital age. They must have appropriate managerial competencies and resources to act in full independence and autonomy when they introduce us to digitalization. Mr. Komodromos, the director of the Electronic Communication Department of the government, will of course elaborate a little bit more on that. I also believe that media stakeholders should share guidelines on the goals and means of achieving diversity of sources and information, ensuring their visibility across different platforms and exposing them to the widest possible audience. Ideally, the media should be the subjects of due trust. In other words, more trust is only appropriate when it is deserved. Initiatives to improve trust in the media should therefore emerge from wider attempts to improve media ethics, professionalism, and genuine media literacy. So the recent evidence of a decline in trust in the media may not be such a bad thing. It is widely recognized that the fake news and online misinformation discussion plays out against generalized skepticism toward most of the actors that dominate the contemporary information environment, and I quote Nielsen and Graves 2017. According to the Oxford Reuters Foundation now, the average level of trust in the news among the countries surveyed remains relatively stable at 44%. However, 34 of respondents say that they trust news they find via research, and fewer than a quarter, 23%, say that they trust the news they find on social media. Newman again, 2018 this time. On the contrary, brands of the broadcasting background and long heritage tend to be trusted most, followed by upmarket newspaper brands, whereas digitally born and popular newspaper brands tend to be trusted least. Newman again, 2018. Based on Net Trust Index, among the broadcast media, on average, radio appears to be the most trusted media in Europe, and that it comes from the European Broadcasting Union, EBU, 2018 as well. However, there are significant national differences. Public broadcasters score best in countries where they are seen to be independent of government, but in countries like Italy and Spain, they have lower scores in absolute terms, but also in relation to certain flourishing digital-born brands. Mr. Jules, I find it straight away this time, Darmanin, he's the director of the BuzzFeed News, but also deals with fact-checking. I'm sure he will develop a very clever and innovative presentation right after. Moreover, in the context of the increased political organization in a number of countries and the rise of populist parties, declining trust in news often seems to be linked to political tensions at national level. While Finland is holding steady at the top, along with Portugal, of course, at 62%, trust is down 7 points in Spain, 44%, as the media have become caught up in the wilder splits of Spanish society after the Catalan referendum. It is also down in Austria, -4, following a divisive series of elections, and in Poland, -5, where the government has been accused of cracking down on private media in the name of combating fake news. This is where Ms. Lara Orlandi will come in very, very helpful and give us all the information about how the European Union is dealing with all the information and how we deal with misinformation on the media. Through trust indicators and fact-checking initiatives to address the decline in trust in media outlets in response to the widespread of fake news and misinformation online, a number of cross-industry collaboration, code of practices and guidelines have been developed in the past 2 years. As highlighted by the European Commission, good industry practices tend to fall into 3 major categories: transparency, trust enhancement, and media information literacy. Within this content, those online platforms and advertising networks that have signed the EU Code of Practice on Disinformation have committed to invest in products, technologies, and programs to develop and implement effective indicators of trustworthiness in collaboration with the news ecosystem. However, the proposal put forward by the COP appears to be vague, and there is no common agreement among industry representatives. In the meantime, news media organizations, broadcasters, and the civil society are developing and testing fact-checking initiatives in collaboration with online platforms such as Google and Facebook. Such an effort is COINFORM, is also sponsoring and supporting the event today, which objective is to create tools to foster critical thinking and digital literacy for a better informed and disinformation resilient societies. Their definition is accurate and describes what we all want to lead at, and I quote, "The most adequate method for achieving the right equilibrium between actors and types of solutions against disinformation by promoting a method with which governments have the possibility to promote the interaction between researchers, journalists, private sector, non-profit sector, and citizens with minimal intervention." And with that, I will stop my own intervention. I will go through the impressive list of panelists. I will give you a small, very, very short, because they are all very magnificent professionals, very short bio of each one of them, and then we will proceed with short presentations from each one of them. We will follow with a set of questions between the panel, and then, of course, the longest period will be given to you for questions and answers from the panelists. I will start with Ms. Lara Orlandi, who studied languages, law and European studies at the University of Vienna and at KU Leuven in Belgium. She has over 9 years of work experience in EU affairs with a focus in the EU digital policy and media law. Currently, she works as policy officer in the Audiovisual Media Services Directive on issues relating to media freedom and media literacy in the Directorate General for Communication, Networks, Content and Technology. Apart from her native German and Italian, Lara is also fluent in English and French. No Greek, not yet.
Not yet.
Mr. George Komodromos is the Director of the Department of Electronic Communications of the Ministry of Transports, Communication and Works of the Republic of Cyprus, where he is responsible for formulating and monitoring the implementation of the National Digital Strategy, the National Space Strategy, as well as the regulation of the use of radio spectrum. He has worked for the department of nearly 2 decades, representing the electronic communication interests of the Cyprus Government internationally. Ms. Antigoni Themistokleous studied Media and Communications Regulation and Policy at the LSE, UK, after her graduate studies in classics. She then completed her PhD at the University of Brighton. She has been working at the Cyprus Radio Television Authority for 12 years. She coordinates the authority's media literacy policy and projects and work on monitoring the broadcast content. She has collaborated with the European Audiovisual Observatory in undertaking a comparative research in media literacy titled Mapping of Media Literacy Practices and Actions in EU 28, that was in 2015, and commissioned by the European Commission. Her research interests focus on communication policy and governance, media regulation and ethics, including issues of diversity, pluralism, and media freedom, and the use of language in the media. Dr. Vasilis Koulolias is the Executive Director of eGovLab and the coordinator of the COINFORM project. He is a technologist, economist, and political scientist, international relations and special, and has dedicated over 2 decades in bringing the benefits of ICT to popular democratic proceedings while bridging the gap between citizens and policymakers. He works with nearly all member states in Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Southeast Asia, participating in key European and Swedish initiatives for public service transformation through co-creation. He has expertise in the coordination of EU-funded projects with several programs, business process management, advising and assisting governments to modernize their legislative procedures, and enabling citizens to exercise their rights to democratic participation, as well as on the research of citizen participation, engagement, and politics. Wow. And he doesn't like to travel that much anymore, so we're blessed to have him. Thank you for making that exception. Mr. Jules Darmanin, based in Paris, is the project coordinator in FactcheckEU, a fact-checking platform uniting 19 outlets in 13 European countries. He has worked as a journalist, fixer, and researcher for English and French-speaking media, including BuzzFeed News, Le Monde, and Le Figaro. He is also a trainer in fact-checking and social media-focused journalism. He has been teaching at Sciences for 3 years. Welcome. Happy to have you with us. If you allow me, I will follow the presentations on the order that I read the bios. So let's start with Ms. Lara Orlandi.
Yes, hello everybody. It's a real pleasure being here in beautiful Cyprus, which is very close to my heart for many reasons. I'm really, I have to say, thank you for the invitation. I also attended yesterday's panel, and it was like extremely interesting and of high quality. So there was a lot of interaction. I go to a lot of panels in Brussels, and sometimes I feel we can only learn from you, because there was a real dialogue, which I think is needed. And I'm also going to try to be try not to repeat what has already said, even though it's difficult. It will be difficult because I think my commissioner already pointed out our main strategy to counter this very complex phenomenon of disinformation. I would just like to maybe touch upon 3 key issues, which I think in this debate are so interesting, and of course from a European perspective as well, because we've been now the last month really working very hard and trying to think in a way also conceptually and strategically what we could do to counter disinformation, because we had the upcoming election last 2 weeks ago. So this has been very intense and an interesting time for us. So the 3 topics I would like to touch upon is, of course, the complexity of the issue. I think we live in a time which the media has been really disrupted is a bit negative, but we lived in a time where we just watched linear TV, all around, together with our families in front of the TV. And now with the social media, the last 10 years, I mean, this has been changed absolutely. So there is this brought about many issues which of course catch up upon that in social media. The information which is spread is of an enormous amount, which before wasn't the case. And what I want to also say is that we always have to look at the spectrum, basically, of this information, because this information is a little bit of course, a buzzword, but it can really go from inaccurate journalistic news to humorous puns, but what the real problem with what we should be talking about today is the really targeted, malicious political news, which is trying to influence our societies and disrupt the fabric of our societies. So, for instance, if they try to undermine democratic institutions or undermine scientific, empirical knowledge, like it is the case with the vaccine news, which spreads so easily over social media. The second part I want to touch upon is the enormous power of platforms, of course. They are today's gateway. When we access these platforms, we have access to so much information, but there is all this algorithmic curation of the content, which is very problematic. And there I would like to go into platform regulation, which basically my commissioner presented before our code of practice against disinformation, which was basically initiated by the European Commission. And our main strategy in this code is to talk to the major platforms and to try to make them have more responsibility for their algorithms, more transparency. In this context, for instance, the Code on Practice of Disinformation has a number of principles and a number of really concrete actions to tackle the problem. So it was like, it was initiated last October, and we managed to have Google, Facebook, Twitter. Now Microsoft is also adhering to this code. It's a self-regulatory code, so it's very different from, of course, co-regulation or from legal action. So basically, they themselves say that they are signatories of this code, and they themselves say that they want to adhere to it. But we, the Commission, are monitoring the implementation of this code. And this was very interesting in the upcoming elections, because every month the big platforms send us their reports and send us what they actually did. And I want to just touch on the very basic measures which they had to take. So one is on transparency of political advertisement. This is interesting when you go on Facebook, for instance, before the election, but this is basically the principle that you really have to make a distinction between editorial content, on the one hand, and sponsored political advertisement. So it's very important for the consumer, for the reader, for the user to make these distinctions. And platforms like Facebook now have this option where they really they give you this information, sponsored content. You can click on it, and then you can actually see who paid for the advertisement, which political party, for instance, how much was paid, this is also interesting, and who it targets. So it's really which gender is targeted, which age group, which country. Just as an example, I looked in Italy, I looked up Matteo Salvini, our vice premier, just out of interest, and I saw that the last 3 months he spent a considerable amount of money, 130,000 euros. And what was interesting is that you could really see how it targeted, which age bracket was targeted. So I do invite you also to check this this transparency obligation. Then the platforms, this was also part of the code of, on disinformation of the Commission. They basically adhere, they oblige themselves to make an ad library, so there is a whole library in, you can have it on, you can go and look on Google and Facebook, where you can have really all the ads which were put during the political process, during the European elections, all the ads which were actually bought. So this is interesting. And then there has been a real effort to tackle the problem of bots. So this is, of course, like inhuman and technical fake accounts which try to poison the social networks, and they're often used, of course, strategically to spread this information. And it's been quite successful, because in the last months, I mean, every month you can also look at the reports. Thousands and millions of bots have been actually taken down. It's been a very interesting time, and now at the end of the year, the Commission is going to do an overarching assessment of this code of practice. And if we feel that the platforms haven't lived up to the commitments, we will also envisage further regulatory steps. The last part I want to talk, which for the Commission is of course of huge importance. Yesterday there was some discussion around the media literacy, that it's not the answer to all the questions. I agree, but it's definitely one of the answers, because I think that we should have a very broad definition of media literacy, and this is what we also have in our core piece of legislation, which is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which I had the pleasure also to be part in the negotiations. Basically there, for instance, in this directive, which is implemented then in every member state, for the first time we have a legal obligation for member states to really promote media literacy. But what does media literacy mean? In our understanding, media literacy is really underpinned by critical thinking. So it's not only checking the source, knowing who wrote the piece. This is absolutely part of media literacy and is crucial, but it is much more contextual, because I do think that what we need is more context. I thought that this is also one of the slogans of the projects of Vasilis, because I do think that we need to teach our children, but not only our children, because as we heard yesterday, most of the disinformation spread actually by people over 50. So we need to teach to everybody that context is what actually matters. And here in this field, we have a media literacy expert group, which meets every year, and Cyprus is a very active member state. I'm very happy we met already Anastasia there, and this year also we had for the first time, because we really wanted to have a bit more publicity on the issue and to do more on it, we had a European Week of Media Literacy where many things were discussed. As today, I mean, similar topics came up, but just a key takeaway maybe was that media literacy should indeed be part of school curricula and should be embedded in a way in the whole cycle of the education. So it shouldn't just be limited to one workshop every now and then, but it should be really inherent. And that this is a very complex phenomenon, and where the most important part of it is really cooperation, that we all cooperate, and this is a great opportunity today to cooperate, because we have the fact checkers, the research and academia, of course the policymakers, journalists, so I'm very much looking forward to the further discussions.
I'm keeping a few things from your presentation. I'm keeping the question about what is media literacy, is it the answer to misinformation. I'm keeping the interference to democracy as far as malicious political messaging. I'm keeping the amount of information that we receive, and we have all know that we have moved from articles to titles, so we're all bombarded on the receival of information. I'm going to go on forward to Mr. George Komodromos, but I want to make one thing clear. If you want this panel to go on peacefully, refrain from your comments from the 50+ people. It includes a lot of us. We are not that old. That's a joke. Mr. Komodromos. I remind you that Mr. Komodromos is the Director of the Department of Electronic Communications from the Ministry of Transport, Communication and Works, and he is responsible in monitoring and implementation of the National Digital Strategy. So I guess this is what the presentation is all about. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. The Liability for Information Society has been assigned to the Ministry of Transport, Communication and Works in accordance with the relevant decision of the Council of Ministers in 2009. Within this framework, the digital strategy for Cyprus was approved by the Council of Ministers in February 2012 and was updated in 2015 and in 2018. Now, a tender is in progress for drafting a new digital strategy. The digital strategy has a comprehensive approach and includes the following goals. First, the connection of the whole of Cyprus with high-speed networks so that citizens can have access to broadband infrastructure and secure, high-quality and fast services. The digital transformation of the government and the provision of effective public electronic services accessible to all. Third, the empowerment of human resources by training and educating all citizens, including the vulnerable groups of the population, to use information and communication technologies, ICTs. Fourth, the promotion of the use of ICT in the private sector so that businesses increase their productivity by producing innovative practices. And fifth, the use of ICT for the support of sustainable growth and the deployment of smart society. The digital strategy has a vision. Every citizen, every business, every public organization to be digital by default. The current action plan within digital strategy focuses on the development of modern broadband networks like fiber to the home, 5G, at affordable prices. Second, the development of digital culture, awareness campaign, trust building, e-skills, active participation. Third, the broad digitization of businesses. Fourth, the provision of a wide range of broadband services by public sector. The DESI, which is the European indicators, measure the performance of member states within the digital economy and society, has 5 chapters, especially the chapter 2, which refers to the digital literacy and the digital skills. Cyprus ranks 24th out of 28 EU member states. The lack of digital skilled people is a very serious gap. In general, the low levels of digital skills act as a brake on the further development of our digital economy and society. In particular, digital literacy is very crucial since it is a prerequisite for raising awareness on the role of thinking about the media critically and can reinforce the beauty of disinformation resilient citizens in Cyprus. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, George. We will move on to Mr. Themistokleous, the representative from the Cyprus Radio and Television Authority. I don't know if the reason everybody is leaving is the temperature, but if we can fix it a little bit, maybe we will stay a little bit longer because it's really cold up here too. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. And yes, I don't know whether I will stay loyal to my presentation or whether I will take advantage to make a comment and brief from Lara's statement. So I'm definitely agreeing with what she said about the complexity of the issue and about the spread of enormous amount of information, especially through social media, and about her perception of the role of media literacy. So yes, thinking that there is an enormous spread of information, I would say that we live in an age of information obesity, whereas at the same time we experience a paradox of intellectual fitness. At this point is the role of the survey of the Cyprus Radio Television Authority. Just to mention that Cyprus Radio Television Authority is an independent national regulator for the audiovisual media services. That means for the regulator for the radio and television broadcast. I would like to stress that the Cyprus Radio Television Authority does not have any power or any jurisdiction over the internet or the video sharing platforms. And this will be the situation until February 2020, where according to the European directives, we need to find a solution of how to regulate video sharing platforms. First of all, I would like to present you the legal framework of the national legislation that refers to our discussion about misinformation and how we try to tackle. There are specific regulatory provisions regarding the quality of information that should, and certain principles that should govern broadcast. Article 26 and paragraphs 1A and C and paragraph 2 are relevant and are applicable throughout the year. And then we have certain regulatory provisions regarding the information and the political advertisement. There is equal treatment of political parties and other candidates, which is applicable especially during the election campaign. Some very good colleagues monitor everything that is broadcast during the pre-election campaign. And we also monitor political advertisements daily. So there is not any risk of certain political candidates have their advertisements for more time than the tenants allowed. We have also the article about the broadcasting of polls. There are certain restrictions on when and how and what information should be available regarding the broadcasting of polls. And of course, Regulation 5.1 of the Regulation of 2006, which refer to the equal treatment. So the authority always encourages broadcasters and journalists not to exclude any candidates or any political parties. However, just to mention that how this equal treatment is translated is not mentioned. So this is left to the sub-regulatory, sub-regulation. And then we have specific articles about the political advertisements. What should be advertised, for how much time is allowed, and definitely negative advertisement is not allowed in Cyprus. On this, I would like to mention our goals and what we try to achieve by enforcing these regulatory provisions. First of all, we would like to ensure that there is pluralism, there is freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and fair information for everyone. We would like to guarantee and to protect the freedom of expression for journalists, but also for the public. Their freedom and their right to know. And how we try to do this? We acknowledge the difficulties, especially in the current digital environment. And having in mind that the Cyprus Radio Television Authority does not have any jurisdiction over the internet, but also acknowledging that much of the information that is spread is online. We acknowledge the role of the social media and of the internet in general. We decided to put our emphasis on media literacy and media education. So we believe, we hope that through media literacy we will empower the students, first of all, because for the moment our action plan is concentrated on students, but also we would like to develop our initiatives to other sectors of the population. We would like to empower them, to make them understand the opportunities they have online, but also to recognize the risks. So they will be thinking more critically of what they see and what they read. Do I have some more minutes?
Just a couple.
Okay, so I prefer to leave this to the question. So you asked me about our initiatives, and I will explain.
I will make sure I ask you that. Thank you, everybody. We will move on to Dr. Vasilis Koulolias. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So, we keep talking about Europe, and we're keep talking about outside of Europe in some of the countries. One of the things that we need to realize is that we live in a global world, and everyone is connected. And only two countries have, India and China, have close to 1.5 billion users on the internet that are far higher than many of the other countries around that we keep focusing on. But what I will do right now is I will look at the area of good governance and democracy and how actually misinformation can influence or actually what governments do to tackle that issue. And I will take you a bit further where the population is quite low. There are about 2.2 million people in Botswana, in Africa. And one of the major issues that the government had, mainly the legislature, is that a lot of misinformation was being distributed amongst the different areas outside of the capital in Komodromos. And as a result, a lot of the constituencies would just turn against the elected official. So what the government decided to do back in 2016 was to be fully transparent. So they created a site where any citizen could actually go in and look at the current legislation that is being debated, and then ask questions or do whatever necessary in the area. Of course, inclusiveness is another big issue because many people do not have access to the internet. So in their tribal democracy, they have this tree that they all gather in small villages, and a lot of the public officials would actually go in. So they created an organizational transformation to combat this issue, because at the end of the day, it's not about technology, it's not about policies, it's not about society, it's about all three of them. So if we're not looking at all three aspects that actually create a much better governance in the system, then we live ligatures. So there would be a parliamentary official with an iPad that would actually talk about the issues that would affect this particular village or this particular area, and then there would be an interaction between the constituency staff that is locally placed with the village that actually grew into the region, and then it all carried through with technology back to the National Assembly. So, and this is a very old tradition. It's a very old tradition of democracy that dates back far beyond the Athenian democracy, at least from what we have studied. And we have a lot to learn also from some of the most unsuspected places. Japan actually has been studying this type of democracy. They have a saying, in fact, and instead of previous time around, I will speak some Szechuana, which is "Dua holo ke la molomo," which means that the highest form of war is dialogue. So, and this is how they live. This is how they live. Now, when we look at good governance, and that includes the threats to good governance, and of course misinformation and disinformation is one of the biggest societal challenges that we are facing in the 21st century, that we all together as the international community need to combat, is the system needs to be accountable, transparent, responsive, equitable, effective, efficient, that follows the rule of law, participatory, and consensus-oriented. And this is what brings about good governance. And this also brings trust back into the system, because this is what is missing in the political sector and the societal sector, and the relationships in between. So, when we're talking about regulation and the role of the state on fortifying democratic processes, there are actually two approaches. One of them is the government, and the other one is also the private sector, since they are the holders of our information. And let's not forget that whoever owns the infrastructure owns the data, and whoever owns the data owns the information and the opinions and blah, blah, blah. So infrastructure is key. And today we're living into this kind of an infrastructure battle amongst mainly two states that we're all seeing in the news. Now, what can governments do about this information? Back in 2017, we invited a number of government CIOs in Tokyo, and we talked about this information because this is the time that it started to emerge as a major global challenge. And we asked, what shall we do about it? What can the government do about this? And many of the things that we're talking about today were actually discovered back then. One of them, I mean, I'll just look at some verbatim statements from state secretaries of digital transformation and also government CIOs. One of them was fund education and raise awareness. Governments should create a legal framework and legal consequences to those who share a lot of disinformation. Provide funding to design technological solutions to detect misinformation. And these are the things that we're seeing now moving forward. Promote international cooperation with international organizations within that. And of course, with the underlying principle that governments should not limit the freedom of expression. Then, I mean, there were a number of other things, but the key is open data. Start young, focus on vulnerable groups, involve the research community, involve the public servants, because they are also the ones that can actually promote the good governance. Now, over the past year, there have been many initiatives throughout Europe and around the world on combating disinformation and building this kind of legal frameworks. Within the EU, Italy, for example, the government has set up a website allowing people to report false stories to the police. In Ireland, the bill was proposed to criminalize the use of bots that spread misinformation. In Denmark and Sweden, they have taken steps to include disinformation in the existing media literacy campaigns and the educational system. So this is one of the things actually that we're doing with all of this. Some of the noteworthy efforts, and I will raise just three of them before I conclude my statements, is in France and in Germany. The German approach bundles disinformation into a new hate speech law that fines up to 50 million euro for social media platforms that fail to remove hate speech and illegal material within 24 hours. Of course, that's an issue because within 24 hours the news have already spread. So it is not really very effective. But they're looking at this right now. And France focuses on transparency, requiring social media to reveal the sources of news, content, and advertising, but also that allows sites that host fake news stories to be shut down following the judicial procedure. Now, on the other extreme is Singapore. They just passed a new law where government decides what is factual. So the Singapore Parliament just passed legislation aiming at halting the spread of fake news after the government said that the country would be vulnerable to the spread of misinformation online. And we see that in that part of the world quite a lot, with Taiwan elections and so on and so forth. So I will just leave you at this. Fortifying our democratic systems. And it takes three elements: a societal transformation towards building trust into the system, technologies that can actually assist everyone to understand and become knowledgeable, including fact checkers and so on, that is fully transparent, because this is the key. Technology has to be fully transparent. And of course, policies that actually fortify our society against this challenge that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasilis. We have one more presentation to go, and then we'll have a half hour of question time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks to the organizers of this panel for the invitation, and thank you to all of you for having showed up on a Saturday morning. That's an act of bravery that I commend. So I'm the coordinator for FactcheckEU, which was, and still is, but is over now, a project around the European elections. It was a project from the IFC and International Fact-Checking Network, which is a network of fact-checkers around the world. And so we have 19 partners in 13 countries who fact-check together the European elections and share their work on a single platform. That was a great experiment in collaboration between fact-checkers all over the world. So I'm going to talk from the fact-checking standpoint. And I want to say two things about fact-checking so that you understand where it's coming from. The first thing is that fact-checking as a practice started around 20 years ago, I would say. And you have to be reminded that it started by fact-checking claims from politicians. It's something that we really haven't talked about on this panel or in this discussion, but it's it's also fact-checking things in the public discussion that comes from politicians, and I think that it's important to have in mind, especially considering what I'm going to make. And fact-checking, if you have to define it in a very straightforward way, is just the transparent practice of journalism. I don't think it's really more than that. It's journalism in which you allow the reader to do the same thing you just did by showing up all of the process you've been through in order to verify a claim. It's really allowing the reader to do what you just did. And I think that it's also very important to have in mind, because it is also a response to a shift we've already discussed, in which the informational system we're in is becoming more and more horizontal, in which everyone has potentially the same voice or is able to have the same influence, and it's not, a couple of TV networks and a couple of radio networks and 4 or 5 national newspapers. It's a much wider variety of voices. And fact-checking is also responding to that. It's really responding to the crisis in trust that this could engage. And considering that, I want to make maybe I want to be the controversial panelist today. By taking issue with the idea, not the idea, but the framing of media literacy. Because when you talk about literacy, you imply that people are illiterate. And I'm not sure that it's the best framing of the issue, because it ignores this horizontality. It's still a framing in which the power structure, whether it is political institutions, media institutions, are going to make the public literate. And I think that's not necessarily the best point to make, as opposed to you need to be more transparent as an institution, whether it is a political or a media institution. And I know that fact checkers amongst the media ecosystem, it is what they're trying to do. They're trying to reinforce transparency, not only in their practice, but also in the practice of other journalists. And fact checkers are very prone to fact check other media outlets, other journalists, in order to say this is false. We have a very recent example in the story about the young Dutch woman who committed suicide by stopping eating, and a lot of media outlets, including the Daily Mail, but also the BBC, said that this woman was legally euthanized, which is completely false. And fact checkers were equipped to put some transparency in how the story was reported and where it was coming from, and how they checked it and how they proved it false. So I think that the onus shouldn't be put on the public that should understand how algorithms work or things like that. I think the onus should be put on institutions of power, media, and political institutions. So in that regard, I think that it's really interesting. The last one from Vasilis, because it shows how, as a state, you can take appropriate action, but you can also take very inappropriate actions, like Singapore or other countries. And as a legislator, I think it's important to acknowledge that maybe the tools that you put in place, if you are in a democratic state, well, those tools are going to carry over you, and they're going to be sometimes used by the guy who comes after you, and might have a different approach or a different use for these tools or a different interpretation. So I think on a state perspective and on a legislative perspective, it's something that you have to keep in mind. Because maybe the law that you're putting in place is not going to affect free speech because you're not going to use it for that. But maybe the government going to use it in order to impede free speech. I think that's why you need to be very careful with the legislative approach. For different approaches in terms of what the state can do, I think it's important to differentiate various threats that poses disinformation and misinformation. And I think we talked a lot about election integrity and politics, but I think that at least for me, the biggest threats are public health, and it's going to be, I think, something that worsens through the time, and just public safety in general. And I also want to take an example outside of Europe, which is India. There's been numerous reports about local rumors, very local rumors on WhatsApp, which concluded in the assassination, group assassination. People were accused to be child abductors, and it's in very local communities, and it's something that we've seen something like that actually in France, near in the suburbs of Paris, in which Romani people were accused of abducting children. It was a rumor that was circulating in Snapchat, and there was fortunately no one was assassinated or murdered, but there was clearly violence towards this community coming from rumors. And I think that the role of the state in preserving public safety and public health is very important, and it needs to take into account the threat that poses disinformation. And for me, it is much more urgent and crucial than election integrity. I think that it is crucial for public health, for public safety. There's a lot of misinformation rather, after catastrophes, terrorist attacks, natural catastrophes, and I think the role of the state here in those cases is very important.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to the panelists and to the audience. Let's just stretch for just a second so we can hit these people with more questions. And I would like to start with Lara and ask you a little bit about how the law, the European, let's say, agreements with the platforms are in contact or in coordination with the local law. And I will give you an example. We had the European elections lately. In Cyprus, we have a law that says that 48 hours before the elections, every campaign has to stop, and that is Friday midnight, because the elections start on Sunday morning. We had about 25 cases that we woke up on Saturday morning and realized that we did not take down the electronic material. It took us about a day to be able to contact and give the information, because the amount of information that they asked from the government to give them, especially Facebook and Google, was immense. So by the time they reacted, it was actually Sunday morning when the elections, the voting bodies started to go vote. So what is the possible coordination between whatever you guys are trying to do and the local law and regulations?
So in terms of legal framework, there is no legal framework in that sense, of course, on misinformation. Like, this would be very difficult for many reasons that we discussed today, but especially for freedom of expression and so on. So usually, this is for linear TV, of course, where it's much easier to actually implement, and where you have also, and for the press, where you have press councils and so on. But in VSPs, how we call them, so these are video sharing platforms, there is no laws for that. Our code of conduct, this is self-regulation. This is what I also tried to explain. There was really a big push from all the member states, but also on an EU level, to have this cooperation be put in place. It's the first time it's been done, and it showed a lot of results. But of course, there is still lots of improvements, because, as you say, for instance, just before the election, it's very difficult then also to oblige the platform, because there is no legal obligation in that sense. So these are all like self-regulatory tools, and we're going to do an overall assessment of this code by the end of the year. So this would be very interesting for you also to bring forward, to bring to our attention, and we will look into it and see how, for instance, in the next years also we could increase this self-regulation, for instance, going forward through co-regulation, where there would be the regulatory audiovisual authorities who still sometimes don't have the competences, we heard from our colleague, to really look into the online world, because there the laws still need to adapt. But I think this is a great opportunity to have it in our assessment, to be quicker next time. Yeah.
Thank you. I will move on to the laws and regulations, and I'll go to Antigoni, that we all know that the law in Cyprus, especially whatever you're controlling, which is under your auspices, is TV and radio. At the same time, we have a self-governance body as far as the printed media, but at the time, I don't think we have anything in place for electronic.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. The internet and the news portals that are online, even the online portals of the linear TV are not under the control of the Cyprus Radio Television Authority. That's why, as far as I am aware, none of these 25 cases appeared in radio or TV, conventional radio or TV stations. So, what happens is there is a self-regulatory body, the Cyprus Media Complaints Commission, in which certain the publishers of online, I don't know how it is the name in English, well, they are also most the publishers of the online news portals, these have signed the code of ethics of the Cyprus Media Complaints Commission. But again, that is a self-regulatory body, and the only power they have is just to persuade, to publish, to issue a decision that there is violation of this principle, of this clause. Nothing else can be done. And again, it takes time in order to, concerning the complaints that are examined by the Cyprus Media Complaints Commission, as far as I am aware, there should be a complaint lodged by the public, by a citizen, by an individual. Whereas in the case of the Cyprus Radio Television Authority, the authority initiates examination on its own. So we don't need to have a complaint.
Can I ask Mr. Komodromos, why is there such a difference between the ICTs, which were high? Cyprus has a lot of technology. I'm sure that the same situation is, as far as my research is concerned, in most countries. ICTs are high, we do have the technology and we do have the innovation, but the DESIAS, that is the societal response to it, is so low. And Cyprus is the 24th in the line of the European countries, I guess.
Actually, in general, our ranks is 22nd. The chapter 2 is the worst one for us, which we are 24th. For these skills, for human capitals. This is our the bigger weakness, I would say, that and one of our two for me serious problems to educate our citizens for digital skills, for digital literacy. This is a very big gap, and we have to think how to face it. And of course, the other one is the cost of the internet. But in general, we don't have, let's say, a satisfied performance for ICTs.
Okay. I have a question to Vasilis and Jules, because you're contradicting yourselves and you're conflicting with each other. I like the idea of how we could move on to media literacy, and you mentioned a few things that I find very, very interesting, like is fund education, raise awareness, fund detecting technology, yes, cooperation, without really limiting the freedom of expression. And from the other side, Jules, you were mentioning that educating the citizen and the society will not bring us much results, so we have to go into legislation on fact-checking. At the same time, I don't like what you just said about Singapore, that whatever the government says is correct, it is correct. I hope we will go back to that. So I'm going to start with Jules.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that any form of education is useless, but what the point I was making is that the burden should be mostly on the powerful institutions, and that they are the one who need to build trust rather than knowledge. I think trust is important. I think that people are more capable of critical thinking as sometimes we can assume, and that you don't need to ramp up their skills in critical thinking. You need to make an effort for them to trust you. And I think that education has a role to play in that, many people have never met a journalist. They never met someone who was in charge of making the news. And I think that's perhaps the most important aspect of education and having journalists go to communities, to schools, is that people can meet a journalist and they can ask as many questions as they want. And for me, when I go to middle schools and I talk to teenagers, the important thing for me is not for them to be able to reverse search an image, even though it's important. But the most important aspect of my visit is for them to be able to ask anything they want, and for them to know that I'm a journalist, I'm someone that they can turn into, and I'm not some sort of Illuminati that is trying to control their minds. And this is what I meant when I said that I think we should frame things maybe a bit differently.
Okay, so this is not an issue anymore. we can move on to of course the censorship of information, which is and a lot of it is based on the type of governance model that governments have. So I'm in favor also of participatory governance. So I do not think that what Singapore did in the regulation is something that I would choose. But on the other hand, it's there, and we cannot neglect the fact that there are many governments that actually regulate and censor, a lot of information that is being distributed and how it is being distributed. So, and that is a fact.
Can you incorporate a little bit in your rhetoric on how do we ensure that we do not affect the freedom of expression on journalists, and then we'll go into the public section as well? So there's a big discussion around what is freedom of expression, especially from the journalists, because if we try and put the regulations there, or at least try to form, and I will ask you the one about the code of reference in various very sensitive issues, journalists usually, and I'm sure we have people in the audience who can continue with the questions, they feel that we're trying governmentally or by laws to control the freedom of expression and in some way limit the investigation on journalism.
I also believe in the freedom of expression to the journalists, but in today's society we get information from various sources. So it is not only journalism. On the other hand, we have organizations such as the fact-checkers that can actually go in and start rebuilding this trust into the system. So when we're looking at things, we need to look at it from a holistic perspective, where we are trying to address the societal challenges through media literacy and critical thinking, and of course some kind of a code of conduct that you need to have as a journalist, and that needs to be somehow enforced. So I believe that also technologies can play a very big role into detecting how information is actually spread and what types of information is being spread, as long as technology is fully transparent. So yeah, I mean, I do not have. I believe that I believe in the freedom of speech, and I think that this needs to be protected. On the other hand, you need to protect society from a lot of the threats of disinformation. So, in that sense, there needs to be some kind of of regulatory framework to be able to address that.
Can I ask Antigoni on what do you do in order to bring this two together in actions that, I mean, further from implementing the law? What are the efforts that you're doing in order to bring misinformation away from the public? So.
First of all, yes, it's an implementation of the law. And secondly, there are different initiatives of the authority. First of all, you have the roundtable discussion, the seminars on various issues. We had recently one in 2017 and one in 2018, two different roundtable discussions about the role of misinformation and disinformation, the fake news, and how do we empower the people, how do we protect the people, how do we prevent the distribution of fake news. We also have we organize seminars about good practices of how journalists can report on sensitive issues, for example, of violence or violence and sexual abuse of children. And then our big project, I think, is the media literacy programs, the one that we implement in cooperation with the Pedagogical Institute. And with this project, we try to, basically this project illustrates the shift of the attention of regulation. So regulation and media regulation does not only concentrate on the industry or on the side of the producer, because nowadays every citizen is both a producer and a consumer of media content. So we teach students for the time how they can analyze, how they can think critically about the images, the music they hear, everything that is broad.